Right. So as I was saying, we've got a whole package of things that come with the actual shaderware. The main one is the X-ray room and the console. These together help us with positioning classes. And we can do some other dose experiments and things with those. Lecture VR, that's what we get for radiographic anatomy. So we get that to help us with radiographic anatomy. Technic VR is all around the physics of the X-ray beam, how we generate it, what things affect it, how we measure radiation dose. And so that's really useful for that. And then Tomo VR is our CT scan simulator. So ours is a screen-based simulation, and we have a very simple interface because obviously the students want to learn how to use this quickly, and you don't want to spend a lot of time teaching them how to use a menus-driven system. So, you know, anything where you've got to go into a menu and pick an option, it's not immediately obvious, is going to be quite difficult to learn. And so you don't really need that. So what we've got is a mouse-based, so our system uses the mouse, and literally if you left click on the mouse, then you can spin around and look at the environment from any direction. If you use the scroll wheel, then you can zoom in on something in the environment. And if you use the right-hand mouse button, then you can move what's in the middle of the environment. So here, for example, I can now spin round and look at the erect bucky in detail by just making that adjustment. I can zoom out, move over to the table bucky, and now I can spin around that and look at that in detail. So it's that quick and easy to navigate the system. Also, we have this technology we call Reach, which allows us to be able to grab things in the environment. Again, you don't have to go into a menu-driven system. It's just a question of hovering over something. If you want to move it, then there's a little hand appears, and you can left click and just drag and move the object. So you can see how quickly it is easy to actually reach into the screen and move the objects in the screen that you need to move. I've not touched any menus at this point. You know, I can move the table. Okay, so third thing is trying to move objects that are normally locked. Okay, so the X-ray tube is normally locked. So you need to press keyboard keys to unlock the X-ray tube in various directions. And you'll notice over in this corner, there's a gray panel. And if I point at an object which is locked, the gray panel will tell me which keys I can press to unlock it. So here I'm pressing down and holding the S key, and now I can move the tube in that direction. The F key, I can move it in the opposite direction. The D key, I can move it up and down. And the E key, using the scroll wheel, I can rotate it. And I can also rotate the gantry. And I can also rotate the light beam diaphragm there as well, collimator. So I've got all of the movements that I would have in a normal X-ray room. Okay. You following this so far? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So in my practice, when I'm teaching in the university in the UK, we get our students into this class in the first week of enrollment, and they take their first virtual X-ray in the first week of enrollment within a 40-minute session. So within 40 minutes, I can get the students in, they can be using this, they can be learning the interface enough to be able to X-ray a patient and do a shoulder X-ray. And that, of course, gives them a great buzz. They're really happy about that. You know, they've started their radiography course, and by the first week, they're actually X-raying somebody. And that makes them feel really happy about that. It's also a great tool for marketing because we get the students to share their images, you know, look what I've done type thing on their social media, which is, you know, really good for the university, shows that we're investing in good learning resources, and shows that the students are really happy and delighted to be on our programs. And we can take this out as well. I use this in schools. I take it to schools and just show students how the X-ray machine works. And that's really useful in terms of trying to get students interested in doing our subject at a really young age. So lots and lots of things positive there. Now, we need some more tools to be able to take an X-ray, and they're found along this top bit here called the tool ribbon. So if I click on this top left corner here, that's our receptor selection, and we can choose large and small receptors. So I'm going to pick a small 24-30 centimeter receptor without a grid. So I've got a choice of with a grid, 8:1 parallel, or without a grid. So I'm going to pick without a grid. And then I can either drop that on the erect bucket or I can drop it on the table bucket. So I'll drop it on the table, and then you can see the receptor there. Now, you'll notice there's a yellow dot and a yellow edge on the receptor. And you'll notice I can rotate it round and move it about. So we've got an orientation rule here, because this is all about teaching the students, you know, some tricks and some gotchas and things that they will be able to transfer into their clinical placement. So, you know, immediately we start using this, the students understand that the receptors have got a certain orientation rule. So you've got to keep that yellow bit to the top of whatever you're X-raying. And immediately they understand that. They also understand that if you look at the underside of the receptor, you can see that it's blue and it's gray at the top. So they understand there's a side that you can X-ray and a side you can't. So they learn all these things before the first clinical placement, which is really good. Okay, and they learn by doing, which is really good as well. So here I can drop the receptor into the bucket tray, for example, if I want to use a bucket, or I could take it out of the bucket tray and just pop it on the table. So it's simple as that, and it really is mimicking the way in which we use a real piece of equipment. Okay, now I've got my receptor. The next tool I need is side markings, so I can put a left or a right marker on the receptor. So here I've got a left marker. And then what I can do is I can move that marker about, and I can spin it round. I can move it wherever I fancy. So I'll just leave it there for now. And finally, we've got collimation. So I'm going to turn the collimation light on, and that's shining on the floor at the moment because I've got the whole thing twisted round. So let's just straighten it out. Okay, and then I'll move the tube over along the foot of the table there. And then I can hover over the black controls either side of the collimation light. Using the scroll wheel, I can change the size of the collimation. And we've already talked about rotating the collimation if we want to. I can turn the collimation off. So there you go. So they're the main tools we need to be able to take an X-ray. So next we need a patient. Yeah. So to do that, we're going to have to go to the work list. So any questions here before we move on?
Right. Just want to clarify. Will there be a button for the angulation of the tube?
Yes,
Like,
that's
there are specific positions with specific angulation of the tube. Can they practice that one here? Yes, there's no angulation form button or whatever that will show you if the student is really into the right angle.
okay. So you see down at the bottom here, it gives us the tube angulation,
Right.
29 degrees. So that reads out. Yep. So as we move it, it changes. Look, 30, 40, whatever.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And also the source.
What about the line, the table lines?
Sorry, say that again.
The center lines for the tables.
Oh yeah. So as I go along, good question. As I move along, then it will automatically lock.
Midlines. Yeah.
So and then as I move along here, it will lock automatically. That wasn't me, and now that's locked over the detent.
All right.
So that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. You see,
Nice.
that's one of the things that we teach the students using this software, and that's really happened. You know, hospitals report that students are far less likely to make those mistakes since we've brought this system in, because they understand all about locking, moving the tube, not moving the tube when it's locked in the detent, moving the patient to the collimation. and all of those things.
Right. At any rate, would there be an image production after this, or this is just a positioning software?
Oh, no, no, right, yeah, so I'm going to show you the image production now. So basically we need a patient for that. So I'm going to go and get a patient now. So I'm minimizing this. I'm going to fire up the console now.
Okay. This is very interesting.
Okay. So I'm just going to use my my university ID to log in. There's no validation here. The student can put anything they like in here. Obviously, if you're using this for some sort of an assessment, then the student puts their name and their university number in here, and then that will be burnt into any image they generate. We can also generate DICOM images and also JPEGs. So if you've got a PACS system, you can actually have this upload into the PACS automatically, so that every image the students generate goes into some sort of an archive. So we've got some universities using this as a sort of portfolio tool to assess students before clinical placement. So in our case, we get our students to do everything in simulation before they go into practice. So they have to demonstrate that. And I don't know whether it's true in the Philippines, but in the UK, the students will quite often say that they haven't been taught anything at the university. So when they go into clinical practice, they go, oh no, we didn't get taught that. Oh no, we didn't get taught that. But of course they have, but they don't want to appear that they've forgotten it or anything.
Right.
So what we do is we actually get the students have to give their portfolios of simulated evidence to their clinical instructor. And so that means the students can't use that excuse, you know. So the clinical instructor knows they've done all these simulations before they, so that means they've got to perform for the first few weeks in clinical practice. They can't just sit back and pretend, you know, that they don't know anything. So little things like that, it's really helped with. Okay, so this area here, the black area, this is where the images are going to show up. Along the top here, we've got the orientation of images. Down the bottom, we've got window center and window width controls. Over here, we have the settings for the X-ray machine. So we can change the tube voltage here, the tube charge in MAS. We can add a copper filter if we wanted, and we can change the focal spot size here. We've also got a big exposure button. So all the things we need really. Now we need to pick a patient first. So you notice that under the exposure tab here, we've got the study tab. So we'll click on that and we can click on this big green button called the Modality Worklist. And this will give us a list of all the patients that are waiting in reception to be x-rayed. So here we have a list of all the patients. And as you can see, we've got their visit number, their accession number, and their patient ID. We've also got the patient's name, whether or not they're walking or on a trolley, their date of birth, gender, and what they're coming for. So we can make decisions about planning the examination. So, so in this case, this is one snapshot in time of patients waiting in reception. And we use this to teach the students about the informatics of the hospital, how information flows from one department to another, and all of that. You'll notice here that this says session 1. So if I go to the next session, then we get a different list of patients, and the next session, a different list, and it goes on like this. So there are about 20 odd lists of different patients in this list. So
who creates the list? The instructors are given access to create the list.
The lists are there at the moment. They're not editable, but if you have patients that you particularly want to add to the list, then you can send those along. We've had people do that before. So for example, there was a university that wanted a list of chest x-rays. So we made a list that's just got chest x-rays in it, which I think will come up in a minute. There you go. And so this list was a list that the university designed. So we just built it in to the next release.
So it depends, like, so you have a technical support team that would supervise in just in case we wanted to add additional sessions with additional patients.
It
Is that
doesn't,
right?
yeah, you could certainly send the list to us. We can't promise that it will happen that quickly, because we can't release a new version
Right.
every week, that has to be, it's more like
How
every 18 months or 2 years we'd release a version.
you revise the version or you update the version every 18 months? Is that right?
Well, when required, I wouldn't worry too much about updating this because, as you can see, there are hundreds of patients already in there, and those patients have all got, quite a lot of clinical history, clinical indications, terminology for the students to learn. So I think there's quite a lot to get out there. You may think that you would do that, but in reality, I think that you would probably just pick patients that already exist. So what I tend to do,
Yeah. Yeah, Phil. Because what I'm after, what when upon checking on this part, the first part was more on the third level, but this part, it just came into my mind that this can also be useful for our clinical students. We're planning on having our clinical education virtually. At some point, when I see this, I got this realization that we might make use of this as part of our clinical education.
yeah, well, we've
You know,
certainly done
for
that.
third level, that's fine. Third level, we can just pick a few cases for this. But for the fourth level, what that's why I'm asking if we can add some more, because in case that we will be getting this software, there is a specific regulation for the number of procedures for the clinical education,
Yeah,
like how many upper, lower extremities, abdomen. So we
yeah.
might look into that one.
Okay, but bear in mind that when you x-ray, each time you x-ray this patient, any of these patients, you do it so you can repeat x-ray any one of these patients, and it's a new exam each time. It's completely different. So I'm going to pick this guy's ankle, for example. I've x-rayed him hundreds of times, but of course it's a new exam every time. So you can, so I think honestly, you could fill up a logbook by doing these exams every time.
Right, the logbook.
I'll show you. I'll show you. Okay, so this guy's Homer Simpson. He's got pain over the lateral aspect of his ankle. He can't weight bear, query fracture. And in fact, it says query fracture talus here, which is a bit of a specific request, but it just gets the student asking, what is the talus? Which bone is it? That sort of thing. So we're going to make that selection. Now, what it's doing is it's now filling in the DICOM header information that it knows. And then it leaves us to choose which projection we're going to do of the ones that are in the database. But of course, you can choose any projection. These are just the names of the projections. So if you do something different, then you can pick any name and then do that other projection if you want. So in the Philippines, what would you do for a trauma ankle?
Different protocols here in the Philippines. Different institution has different protocols actually. You can just pick one. It's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to say we're going to do a mortise projection and a lateral. So we'll do and an AP. We'll do an AP, a mortise, and a lateral. So I'll do the AP first. So now I'm going to go to the exposure tab. Now you'll notice that I've got the settings here. So this is set automatically for that. Now these settings are not ideal. They're deliberately not ideal. They will give you an image, but they're not going to give you the best radiation dose and the best image quality, because what we want is the student to fiddle with them. We want the student to learn how to optimize their technique. So we'll leave them like that for now. And then we'll go and pick our patient up. So we've now selected a patient to x-ray, and we know what we're doing. We're doing an ankle x-ray. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the x-ray room, and now I'm going to bring the patient into the room. So this button here brings the patient into the room. And now we've got our patient. What we can do is, I mean, it depends how you're going to do this. You describe about how you're in lockdown and how you want to be able to get the students some clinical experience. You know, one of our universities has been doing vivas with the students. So they've been talking the tutor through what they're thinking while they've been x-raying the patients in the virtual environment. So the idea is, at this point, the student would be talking about how they would have to do an ID check, and they'd have to check the patient's date of birth and their address so that they know they've got the right patient, and how they would have to check the clinical indication. So ask the patient where the pain is, what they're having x-rayed today, so that the patient confirms it's the correct limb, you know, and the story fits the clinical indication, so that they've got the justification sorted. So you could do that if you wanted. That's something that you could use it for. Or otherwise, what you could do is you could literally use the situation like a mannequin. You know, you could pretend, you could just treat this like some sort of a plastic phantom that you're going to x-ray. So it's up to you. It depends on the learning outcome of the day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the patient's limb, okay, so that we can rotate the foot and get the patient into the AP position. So for me, AP tends to be with the third metatarsal straight up in the air. So I think that's probably pretty much okay. So what I'm going to do is move the tube across, and then we'll position the patient and position the receptor. Put the marker on. So I'm happy with that for the AP projection. And now I go back to the console, and now I'm going to hover over the exposure button. And as you can hear, you get all the right noises. So if that's your learning outcome, you want to talk about how the X-ray tube works, then you've got all the noises there to explain what's going on in the X-ray tube to make all those different noises. If you want to just do the positioning, then obviously we've got our image here now. We can bring our DICOM header information in. So we've got our operator name and all of the settings. And we can window that so that we can see the quality of the exposure. My exposure index is showing me my radiation dose. So that's 10 times what I should have given. So these numbers are obviously very high. 250 is the ideal. And if I go to tech data here, I've got the column, I can see the other exposure indexes from the other manufacturers. So I've got AGFA LGM value, Carestream value, Fuji value. So I can explain if you've got a more technical group that you're wanting to teach a bit more about how the systems work, then you've got all the different exposure indexes there. You could talk to the students about how they work and what is a good exposure index and what is not a good exposure index. We also calculate the entrance surface dose to the patient for that exposure, the dose area product, and the scatter fraction. So lots of physics going on here. Obviously, you don't have to show the students this if that's not what you're interested in at this time. But if you are doing a more advanced class, then you might.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. That's
really
all right.
Good. This is really good, you know, because our second year levels, because we're still on quarantine measures, so they were not able to do the laboratory last semester. The last year, there were really no laboratories at all, and image production, radiation production were all hanging. The laboratories were not executed, and if in case this will be a very helpful software for us, so that we can trace back what we left off from our students, and they can perform it here.
Exactly. And last year I did all my labs using this software. We didn't do a single exposure lab, and the students really liked it. We got them doing it in small groups, and they came up. What I did was I gave them a journal article to read in small groups, and then asked them to design an experiment, which they did, and come up with a spreadsheet for collecting data. And then we then did the experiment in the lab virtually, like I'm doing with you. So they told me what to do and I drove the machine and we took the exposures. They collected the data and then they wrote a poster with a graph and with conclusions all on it. And then they submitted that poster and everybody looked at the posters and we gave them feedback. And that was how we did our labs. And in fact, that was so well received, it actually was mentioned by the Education Secretary nationally as one of 5 case studies on how universities have dealt with the pandemic. So we were really
good. This is really good. Yeah, it was really a good strategy for the students, because we're actually looking for this this software. We didn't know this last year. The university management were really asking us of softwares and such similar things. We actually acquired Lobster, if you're familiar with Lobster. We had Lobster for our university. However, there were no procedures for radiographers or radiologic technology. So we have limited access to Lobster, and we're looking to something very concrete and very focused to radiologic technologists.
Yeah. Okay.
This is really good.
Brilliant. Right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move the patient to the mortise projection. So we're going to turn the toes in so that the medial and lateral malleolus are equidistant from the receptor. And this should open up the gap between the talus and the fibula. Okay, so everything else remains the same. Good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the exposure down because I know that it was way too much. So I'm going to drop it down to give us a better radiation dose. If you teach things like the 10 kVp rule or the 15% law, all of that will fit and work with this. This system is very obedient to all of the physical principles. So, you know, that's how we teach things like the inverse square law, 10 kVp rule, all of that is taught in this system. Okay,
Nice.
so now you see I can see through the joint space where before I couldn't. So every tilt that I make makes a new, this is what I was saying about when you x-ray the patient, you're doing it for the first time, you know. So although I picked the same patient off the list, it's my choices about where I position the limb, where I position the collimation, where I position the x-ray tube that will be demonstrated on the image. Yeah. So for example, quite a common mistake for students when they set out, when they read the textbook, is they think that you have to turn the foot out instead of in. So they might think this is the mortise projection. So they've turned the foot out instead of in because they've misread it when it said internal rotation instead of external rotation. So what they would get, so they would get something like this, you see, which is obviously wrong. And then what you tend to do is you tend to be able to give feedback to the student and explain why that's what they got and why they need to do something different. And of course, the student, because they get to repeat and repeat and repeat, which is what they can't do in clinical practice. If you're x-raying a person, they learn much quicker. You know, you don't have to wait for the next ankle to come along to have another go.
Learning by doing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very experiential learning.
It is. So that's that system. So I'll dismiss our patient here. We can bring a new patient in. We've got male, female patients. We've got patients who sit on stools against the erect bucky, for example. So this is a patient here who sits on the stool, and we can x-ray her head, so we can move her head about, and so we can do all of the skull work, and we don't do skull work much now, do we? But facial bones and things like that. So that's good, and the students find that really useful. What else can we do? We can also x-ray phantoms. So we have you'll notice that that phantom ankle was, the toes were down. So you notice that the calcaneum is on that. You see how the calcaneum is overlapping the fibula there?
Yeah.
So that's because the toes haven't been brought up, because the patient would, quite often patients refuse to bring their toes up because they're in too much pain. So here we've got a phantom with the toes up. So what we can do is we can, so our software is a real bargain, because these phantoms, if you were to buy a phantom for the X-ray, the plastic phantom alone to use with your X-ray room is more than our software costs.
Yeah.
So, here you get all the
phantom. I have an anthropomorphic phantom, but it's just a foot because it's very expensive.
Yeah, well, now you've got, if you buy the lab, we have feet, we have ankles, we have knees, we have, so we have loads of different phantoms that also come with, we have male and female patients as well. So you get different variations in anatomy that you can, so you could do a male pelvis, a female pelvis, see the differences. It really brings the class to life when you can, when the students aren't just shown a picture, but they're asked to go and create the image and then talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it's their image, they're more invested.
Experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll give a different experience. Yeah.
So I'm just going to expose this patient now.
This can also be, correct me if I'm wrong, if we're going to use phantoms, there are a series of phantoms available. So this can also be helpful in the quality assurance and the quality control class.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a step wedge. So, and we have, so here, for example, we've got the aluminium step wedge, and we also have a slab of acrylic. So because you've got a live lab, you can go and buy a slab of acrylic plastic, which is cheap, and you can then compare. So some universities use our software as a comparison to a real X-ray lab. And so I don't know if your students do a final year project, for example, where they have to do some experiments or something. So students have used this as their final year project, where they've done a series of experiments comparing the simulator with a real X-ray machine. And that way they get a really nice set of data that they can write a report on. So that's something.
What's the difference?
Well,
have you computed the difference?
I mean, we'd hope there isn't much difference, because we've spent years and years developing this so that it mimics entirely the real X-ray machine. So although there may be slight differences, there should be no differences in trends. When ours goes up, the real one goes up, and when ours goes down, the real one goes down. So it's valid. Our system is valid. It's just, there'll always be a difference between two X-ray machines.
Yeah.
So here you can see, for example, this is a set of nice gradated systems at 60 kV. If we drop this down to something like 45 kV, maybe go up to 4 and expose that again. Where are we? I need the exposure button. There we are. So now, no matter how hard I try, I'm not going to be able to get all the steps because the contrast is too great, because I'm using a low kV. So now I'll not be able to see all the steps. Yep, right. So I'll be able to do that lab with them on that. We can also see the difference in grids and not grids. So I've not really gone into that, and we haven't really got time. But if we were to X-ray a patient for an abdomen, for example, without a grid, then you would get a lot of scatter. And then you can compare that with a patient with a grid.
Right, because you can't do that. You can just practice with patients. So this
absolutely.
Is really good. Radiation protection is really good for this.
Yep. So let's pick this patient, for example, and put her on the table. So we'll hop this patient. Well, I have to lower the table to working to get her on the table. Right, okay. So I'm just going to x-ray this patient. Let's open the collimation. So I'm just x-raying her abdomen with the receptor underneath her pelvis with the receptor underneath her. So I'll expose this something like 70 and 20. So I've got a horrible I've got a horrible gray image, and the scatter fraction is 83%. Yeah. So what I can do now is grab the receptor, pop it in the bucky, and then I'll drag this over to the middle, and then pop her back in the middle very quickly. Now, if you add a grid, then you add 5 kV and double the MAS. So you can see a massive improvement in image quality because I've used the grid. But if we look, and also the scatter fractions dropped to 28%, but the radiation dose was 4.3 milligray, and now the radiation dose is 9 milligray. So the grid has made us double the radiation dose. So I've got the pros and cons of a grid right there. You know, I've explained that within what, 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes in a class. So that's, you know, that's the sort of speed you can do these things at, and students get it. And if the students struggle with it, then you can go back over it and talk to them a bit more about it.
All right. So this is very interesting. You know, what I'm afraid of is I just need to ask you the very important question. Because actually I'm taking some pictures, some photos, and I'm sending it to my group mates, my counterparts, the deans that will also be requesting this for the administration, because I know there are a lot of, this is very comprehensive software for radiographers, you know, student radiographers, and also for us instructors. It's very useful because, like you said, teaching the difference between agreed and non-agreed procedures are somehow difficult. Especially now that there is a pandemic, it's really difficult to discuss this to the students. But with this one, it's very, very easy, and they can manipulate. They can you know, they can really work on it, learning by experience, learning by doing all of this, because there's no radiation protection here, because it's all, you know, virtual. What my questions are, actually I have lots of questions here, but number one question is that, what is the accessibility of the software? Is it mobile based? Is it a computer based? Or if it's a computer, will there be specific specifications of the computers?
Okay, right. Yeah, so the software has to be installed on a computer. It's not web-based. So you have to have it installed. The way our licenses work is that you buy what we call floating licenses. So that means you can install it everywhere on your campus, but that you buy a certain number of users. So you can install it in the library, on all of your workstations, in your offices, not a problem.
Right.
And then what happens is, say you buy 10 licenses, then if 10 students start using it in a lab, then when somebody tries to use it in their office, it won't work because 10 licenses are already being used. So it's what we call contiguous licenses. So the number of licenses, you need to specify that for the maximum number of users that you think you're going to ever have at one time. Now, you said you had 150 students, but you're never going to have all of them use it at the same time, because so, you know, it would make sense for you to split it down into smaller classes. So you give them a time slot, you know, you'd say, there's 20 students, those 20 students use it between this time and this time, and those 20 students use it between that time and that time. So you may get away with just having 20 licenses for that number of students, or even less, to be honest. So
Yeah.
most universities have between 10 and 20 licenses, I would say.
Okay. What about the computer specification, like Windows 10?
Yeah,
or
any
older?
modern computer, any computer that was built after 2011, Windows computer, it will run on Windows 7 up, so 7, 10, all of the most upgraded. It's been tested on all of that. It can only be Windows though. It doesn't work on Macs.
Yeah. What about video card? Does the computer need video cards? Or
No, the latest Intel chips, you know, from 2011 onwards, will run this without needing a graphics card. So they'll run it on the Intel graphics. Obviously, if you do use a graphics card, then you get a little bit quicker, but it's not really noticeable. You know, our labs just use any computer on campus and it will run.
Right. But is this online, or will this work offline?
This will work. What it happens is that you have it locally installed, but when it runs, it calls home to find out whether there's a license available. Okay. So you need the license server to be accessible. So any computer that it's running on needs to have access to the network just to get the license server acknowledgement.
Okay. For my next question, sorry, I have a list of questions. I just yeah. Will there be printables or downloadables? Like for this image, since the questions earlier, you already answered it. There is an image production. It was already here, clearly explained. Can we download this? Can the student download, or
so if you see here, so I can save the left image or the right image as a bitmap or a PNG or a JPEG anywhere I want. So that's fine. I can also file configure DICOM. So I can enable DICOM pass through, and then I select somewhere to put the DICOM images. Yep. And then every image I take will automatically be saved as a DICOM object. And you can get free DICOM viewers, which you can then use to view the images, but you get the benefit of being able to put measurement calipers on, being able to window, and also, you know, so there's a lot of benefits from being able to see the image in DICOM.
Right.
And there are good free DICOM viewers that the students can download and you can have on your office computers.
So this can work in any downloadable DICOM?
Exactly. It's DICOM compliant.
DICOM compliant.
The other great thing about this, by the way, is there are some universities who treat this as a tool for the instructors rather than for the students. So they literally have the instructors using this tool to screen share like I'm doing now with you, with a class of students, or creating videos. You know, this is a great tool for you to have as an instructor, to create videos, to explain what you want to explain, and then just upload those videos online. So although, you know, simulation sounds really cool and getting the students to use it, and has got some real benefits in getting the students to use it, you know, it's also really, really cool as a tool to give the instructors a whole set of really great resources.
Right.
And I just need to show you before we finish, because that's literally one part of the module. So I've gone on a little slow. So I just want to show you the other stuff very quickly, because this sort of feeds into what I've just been saying about, you know, you guys having these resources that you can use how you want. So here we have the same algorithm that we use in the other program. And but if you wanted to just teach anatomy and the sort of geometry of X-ray production, then you can, instead of using the other program, you can just fire up this program. And what this allows you to do is to literally move the patient in the X-ray beam. Okay, so you can see here we've got small orbits and a large skull. And now if I spin round again, now we've got large orbits and a small skull. So we can see the difference between magnification and distortion that we get when we have an AP and a PA projection there. And we can make that worse if we bring the source image distance in, then we can make that magnification even more. Or we can take the source image distance away and make it less. Yep. So this is a really great tool. You know, normally we would resort to drawing triangles on the whiteboard, wouldn't we, to try and explain this? But here we can actually see it happening in real life.
Right.
Another thing that, you know, this is fantastic for is obviously when we know our radiographic anatomy, then we can tell which structures are which from looking at something like this. But when you're brand new to it, it's really difficult and confusing because some things are structures and some things are overlapping patterns. So here, what we can do is we can just say, you know, if we do this movement, then it becomes clear what is a real structure and what is an overlapping pattern. Yeah. So just being able to do this really helps in terms of teaching our radiographic anatomy. And so this is a really cool little tool for that sort of thing. The other thing that we can do with this is teach students about the acceptability criteria. That's also really useful for the other program I showed you. So for example, here's a Waters projection for facial bones, for example. And you could say to the students, is this acceptable? Would you pass this image? Or do you think you'd need to repeat it? Yeah, you can have a little discussion like that. And then what you could do is you could say, what about this image? You know, would you need to repeat that? You know, and then how would you repeat it? You know, and what I've done in the past is I've created an image like this and put that into the exam paper for a 5-mark question and said to the students, you know, explain what's wrong with this image and how you would correct it. Because it's not easy to find images that are poor technique, really. And so, as you can see, this is, you don't just do, I mean, we can do every body part here with this, basically, or a good range of body parts. So you just use these sliders to so here we can look and see the acromion, we can see clavicle, coracoid process there. Just all becomes clear what's what, you know, when you move it a little bit. So that's that program. And then we have Technic VR, which is the physics program. Now, there's a huge amount to go into this, so I obviously haven't got time to do that because our hour is sort of up now. But basically, you've all seen this, you've seen this sort of graphical representation of the X-ray beam before, where we have the photon energy along the bottom and the number of photons along the y-axis. So here, what we can do is we can expose that, and then we can select that as our default. This is a chest X-ray, 90 kV, 5 MAS. So what we can do is if we change the tube voltage, we can see how that affects the X-ray beam. Yep. Are you still there?
Yeah, I love it. It's really good for the technique subject.
Yeah, so you see, it's really good for making something which isn't very, it's a bit abstract, isn't it? It's a bit difficult for students to grasp. Yeah. But here we can make it more, you know, concrete. We even have a color code because we work on, you know, I think that students understand how light is a mixture of different colors quite well now, you know, the rainbow and everything. So so what we can do is we can actually put a gradient along the back saying if this was light, the low energy light would be red the middle energy light would be green, and the high energy light would be blue. So when we're making these changes, what we're doing is removing, when we change the tube voltage down, then we're getting less and less of the higher energies. So we're removing the sort of greens and blues of the light spectrum, if you like. Whereas when we increase the voltage, then we're getting in more high energy beams. So we're starting to get some blues in here when we get up to 120 kV. So that helps the students to make a concrete sort of analogy. And then
the instructor as well. I guess this is more for the instructor.
Yeah.
It's a tool for the instructor to really discuss these things to the student.
Exactly. And here we, for example, we can even give the X-ray beam a color. So here we have our chest X-ray, which is sort of apple green, because it's mostly mid energies. And then if we pick a mammogram, so here's our mammogram beam, which is an orange color because it's all low energies. Yep. And so this is sort of the candlelight of the X-ray world. That's what I like to say. So, mammography is the candlelight of the X-ray world because it's low, nice warm glow, sort of like oranges and reds. But the other thing you notice about this, because you've got a chest X-ray on the same scale as a mammogram, you'll notice that the students say, well, wow, look how big the mammogram peak is. And of course, it hasn't really occurred to me before that there's a lot more X-rays in a mammogram than there is in a chest X-ray, which, you think that would be a counterintuitive because the breast isn't very large. But when you look at it, of course, it's 71 MAS, so you've got a hell of a lot of radiation.
Yeah.
It's just low energy. So that works. And then here we can have a CT chest X-ray and compare that. So here's a chest X-ray compared to a CT scan of the chest. And you can see the huge difference. So this really helps students grasp the differences in radiation dose between examinations.
Yeah. Radiobiology and radiation protection would be very much interesting for the students. You really can connect with them with this tool.
Yeah, and also we've got all the settings here. So if you want to go into detail with how each of these settings affects the radiation dose, then you can. This is a CT scan, so you can talk about helical scans. You can talk about pitch ratio and all. I can't do that because I haven't got the experience of being able to teach this stuff. But my colleagues who teach CT use it. And also, if we set this running, this CT scan, then we've also got the heating effect on the tube modeled here.
The units, right.
So as you see it running, you can see how the tube heats up. And this is how we can explain why the CT scan room has to be kept really cold. Why you sometimes have to wait between scans because the system has to cool down.
Cool down the tube, yes.
So, all these things, it's about being able to show the student what you've taught them in theory, or even, have a little video where you just chat about it. So there you go. So that's that. And then there's a little CT scan sim, which you get the patient onto the CT scanner, you position them up for position their ISO center. So it's the same algorithm, not the same algorithm, the same idea. You go to the work list, you pick a patient, you pick a localizer. So you see, I always used to make the silly mistakes in CT. Most of the CT training that you get tends to be over the top. It tends to be all the physics and the technical stuff. But when you're first starting in CT, the things that you tend to mess up is things that are much simpler than that. So for example, here, the patient has to go on the gantry feet first. So, that would be the sort of thing I would get wrong. I'd put the patient on the table head first, and then everything would go wrong after that, because I've not made this mistake. So now what's going to happen is it tells me the table's going to move in and the patient should be on the table feet first. Well, if I forget that, and so I raise the table up to the ISO center, put the patient in, and position them up for a pelvis. Put the laser light on. So raise the table high for on the isocenter. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I've got the patient there. And zero that position, turn the laser off. So acquire the scan. So now it's telling me that I can't acquire because the table movement, so I'm in all sorts of trouble. So I've got to get the patient off the table. Is he going to come off? Oh, I have to lower him down, lower the table down. So now get him off the table, put him on feet first, make sure he's at the end of the table. This is the sort of thing I would get wrong, you see, when I was doing CT. And raise the table up again. Put his hands over his head. So you're teaching the basics of CT here, you see, the things that you need to remember, and all the terminology like isocenter, and all of that. Okay, so the table.
Very clinical. Isocentering is very clinical.
So I'm still wrong.
We normally start with the physics of the CT scan before we proceed with the clinical side.
Exactly. So here I'm going to acquire now. And we're going to get our localizer for our pelvis.
So nice.
And he's going to come back and we're going to get an AP localizer as well, because why not? And
how many slices does it produce? That's you can reconstruct and then you can get the slices.
Yeah, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the start position and the stop position and change the scan field of view, so get the full pelvis in. And then I can go to the scan tab. I can load the plan, move the table to the start position, and then acquire. And now the patient will go through and I'll get my slices appear. So I've taken the student through the whole process of developing a CT scan. And yes, we haven't talked about all the settings, but you can do that in the physics program, that I showed you earlier. This is all about getting the patient through. And when I spoke to CT radiographers, they said, actually, we don't really change these settings much. We just pick the protocol and we just run with the protocol 90% of the time. It's all about getting the patient through, making sure you're taking care of them, getting an efficient workflow, making sure you don't make any mistakes. That's what CT is about, isn't it? Okay. So
this is really interesting. This is really good.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for listening.
Right. Will you be giving this? I just need to be straightforward. Will you be giving me the costing for this?
Yeah. So I can send you the costings. Obviously, it's you will need to figure out how many of each thing you need. How many students you want and things like that. I'll send you a ballpark costings thing, and then you can then say, well, how many licenses do you think we can purchase at this time? Lots of universities start small. We've had universities buy 3 times from us. They buy once for a few to check it out. Then they maybe buy some more when they get some more money, and then they maybe buy big, when they get a big grant come in or something. So
this is being paid individually, like per person?
Yeah, and you just multiply that up. I mean, there are some, I'll give you our standard email. If you need any more information, ask me again. It's not me that does the costings. I just do this bit of the process. We've got technical people, we've got accounts managers, and we've got me. I'm the one who does this sort of thing because I'm the one who's the university lecturer who can explain how you use the software to the best effect.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I just wanted to show you is that you can download workbooks. So we have full workbooks here which have lessons plans in them. And, so you're not starting from scratch, So here, for example, this is a fully work through lab sort of set of labs that you can just pick up and and start working from, you know. So you don't have to use these, but you know, when you're first starting out, it's a great starting point, isn't it? All the user guides here. This is all on our website, so you can download this now.
Yeah, I saw that already. I actually downloaded the two workbooks.
Brilliant, brilliant. In terms of where we are, in terms of the world, we're, as you can see, it's very popular. You know, last year we had our most successful year ever because of pandemic. You know, everybody was in the same boat thinking, how are we going to do virtual classes? But we were, you know, we've been selling this since 2006. So we've been developing it, but we haven't yet. So we've, it's
so we'll be the first in the Philippines, is that right?
You would be. I'm just looking now. We haven't got anyone in the Philippines. The nearest is Singapore.
Thailand. I see Thailand there.
And yes, Thailand. We've got Laos as well.
Great selling point that we're first in the Philippines.
Yeah, so you will be the first in the Philippines. We've got Australia, New Zealand. So we've got some Pacific islands, but we haven't got the Philippines.
Right. There are a lot of radiologic technology schools here in the Philippines, like the medical imaging schools here in the Philippines. And this is like a good selling point for our university. We'll be getting this one, the first in the Philippines.
Brilliant. Okay, well, it's been great talking to you. I'll send you a full explaining email, and then you can get back to me if you have any more specifics. And then once you know what you would like a quote for, we can produce a formal quote.
Right, but I'll be waiting for your ballpark figures so that I can also discuss this with my colleagues and hopefully to the administration.
Perfect.
This for the
the other thing, Cielo, about our software is that it's a one-off purchase. There's no ongoing cost. So you make this bid, you say, I want to buy this stuff, and you get the money and you buy it and you own it forever. It's yours. You know, there's no annual fee, there's no service charge, because I'm a university lecturer and I know that this will, for you to import this into your curriculum, it's going to require you to change the way you teach.
Yeah.
Now, no one's going to do that.
For the students. Yeah, that's one thing we worry. It's really costly for the students if we're going to renew this every year. So it's really good to hear that this is something that we already own after purchasing one.
Yes, exactly. Right. Because if you're going to change everything and then next year the administrators say we can't afford it, then that's no good, is it?
Yeah.
So this is
really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Thank you so much, Phil. I've learned so much from you today. I hope that we can keep in touch and we can keep that connection after this.
I'll send you a link to my YouTube channel as well, where there's lots of videos showing me using the software with students.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.